I always love when the writers explain the titles of their books in their books because I'm like, I didn't think of this, but thank you for writing it this way. So now I understand why this is this way. But there are some titles that are very ordinary. But Half Portrait Underwater is not one of them. Half Portrait Underwater is a collection of short stories by one writer. And these stories are very beautiful. So hi, I'm Roving. Welcome to Roving Through Books, and today I'll be reviewing Half Portraits Underwater. Half Portraits Underwater is a collection of stories, and each story is written in such a painfully clear way. You are there is a lot of imagery involved in this story so that you can feel the moment. So it is not just the use of the places, it is the use of imagery that makes you say, oh, this is how I feel reading this. So you are placed inside the story as a reader. You are not reading as someone distanced. And in the titular story itself, you understand, like, because you are not, there's no distance between you and the characters. It feels like you're a part of the story as well, where they're just not talking about you. And in the titular story, as you read what's going on, you can imagine, you can see it play out. And when we get to the part where the title is explained, it hits you in the chest. There's a very visceral reaction because, wow, this is brilliant, this is genius. And for someone to do something like that, like, I mean, the action that prompted the title, you know that there was a lot of thought that went into this, there was a lot of intention behind it. And I believe I felt so moved by that. I think after reading that part, I just had to pause to, adjust myself to accept what I had read, because it was like a heavy dose of something, like, when you're reading and something heavy just hits you, you just have to rest a bit before you continue the journey so that you not collapse on the way. Yes, and that's how that felt. So Half Portrait Underwater was a very beautiful short story. And I like the other short stories as well. A few days back, I saw a spoken word where someone concluded with something along the lines where a son is going to have to choose between his mother's words and allegiance to his country, something along those lines. I reminded me about a couple of stories in Half Portraits Underwater. So we are introduced to this young man, and he wants to be an advocate because he can't stand seeing the ills in the society and not doing anything about it. And I often wonder how people get to that point where they are allowed advocates and they do not consider any cost as too large. So even if their life is taken, to them it is okay for the cause that they are advocating for. And it's a very bold thing to do, it's a very courageous thing. But he's all his mother has left. His mother has no husband anymore. His husband is dead. Her family, there is just a lot of things going on. So when he insists on advocating, she decides to beg him that, my son, you are all that I have left. And he, like, okay, accepts that. Okay, maybe he should just, at least if he doesn't want to save his life for himself, he should save it for his mother. But another event happened, and then he decides, like, he can't take this. Like, in as much as his mother's plea are valid, the plea of his country, even though his country is not saying anything, it's also valid. And we see how that plays out. There, he writes a poem in the story that is very moving, and like that particular poem, it's a very short poem. And when I read it, I was like, whoa, there's, I don't know how to explain, but when you read some heavy lines in books, it's like you swallow a very hard pill. It seems something very difficult to move on with, and that's exactly how I felt when I read that poem. I think I had to reread it because it was a poem, it was an elegy, by the way. So you can expect that it's going to be very sad. So this was someone that had written an elegy earlier on. So obviously he lost someone, and he's like, okay, he will let that go, right? And something else happens, and then he realizes he can't keep the promise to his mother to not advocate, and he goes on to advocate. And we don't know how that ends for him because the story ends in a very that cliffhanger. I'm wondering what happened. I don't know for sure because the person's language was used that I did not understand the language to an extent. But yes, I think a very important thing this story tells us is that there is nothing you can do to bring the dead back to life, as death is such a final thing. Like it's very difficult to accept the finality of death, especially for people that you love. And that is so so final. You can't cry into bringing them back to life. You can't. There's nothing you can do. So once you're gone, you're gone. Which is why when we have people here, we should appreciate them while they are here. But many of us forget to do that in the hustle and bustle of life. Everybody is shouting, Tinubu is taking my 20s, Tinubu is ruining my 30s. And they are all valid complaints. But we should, in spite of all of this, try to make time for people who matter to us, because at the end of the day, either we go first or they go first. And whoever goes first, we have to know that in our own little ways, we tried our best, or at least we tried to stay connected with them. I liked how the stories played out. They were connected, like each character. Not like well, you get to see them play out eventually. How this person is connected to this person, and then you understand why some decisions were made earlier in the book. Another thing this book talks about is exile. One of the things that I believe reading does is it makes some people's problems, it brings them to your face so much so that you cannot ignore it anymore. So if you had seen it in the news that someone was exiled, it may not mean much to you. But when you read a book where the person was exiled, they lost everything, blah blah blah, it means more to you because what writers do is they make you fall in love with characters no matter how little. So these characters become your friends, they become a part of your life in a very not such a big way, but at least they become a part of your life because you know about them. So when these things befall them, it's like you understand how difficult it is to be an exile. And sometimes you're like, it's not, before you read that, you be like, it's not a big deal to be something like this. But then after you do, your perspective changes. And that's what reading does. Reading changes. It makes you see things that you did not see, things that you thought wasn't there anymore. You see it and then you appreciate it. And reading gives you clarity, gives you sight, which is a beautiful thing. Because before this, I did not fully understand the plight of people who had left their countries where there was war in. I did not fully understand it, but I think there was a time where there were a lot of security crises in Abuja and people were packing to leave. So I did not fully understand that there is really no difference between people and other people. It's just location, and location is not by your doing. I mean, if you do not have the power to give ourselves permission to give birth or permission of when to die, we do not have the permission of where we're also going to be born and stuff like that. So there are so many things that are not within our control, and I think it's important to recognize the problems that other people face, not because it will make you feel some type of way about your own problem, but because you realize it gives you a new perspective on life. You realize that there is a lot more to life, positive and negative, that you never knew about. And that's all for me for Half a Sheet Underwater. I hope when you read this, or if you've read this, drop a comment and tell me what you liked about it. Bye.